Well, now I want to introduce you all to the director of Frida, Carla Gutiérrez.
Hola, hi. What a great artist.
What a beautiful film. So incredibly well done and so
Thank you.
moving. We're going to open it up to audience questions in a moment, so get your questions ready. So Carla, here at the Hammer Museum, we're actually really familiar with your work because we have shown some of the movies that you edited. RBG, about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, maybe some of you were there. Chavela,
Oh,
about the
wow.
late great singer,
Uh-huh.
and Cesar's Last Fast.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. So you've been a very, very successful editor for a really long time, and now this is your debut feature film. So congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
So in addition to wanting to direct a film, what drew you, a Peruvian woman, to the legendary Frida Kahlo as the subject for your first film?
Arriba Peru. Así es. I actually did not want to direct until this film told me I should direct this film. This story is what made me a director, really. But I discovered Frida actually when I was a young immigrant in the States, and I was in college at the time, and I used to procrastinate by just kind of getting lost in the library because we did not have cell phones then, just like giving away my age. And I would just kind of get lost in the library and open up art books. And I saw an art book about Latin American art. And I saw one of her paintings there. And it was a painting of La Frontera, which is her being in between the United States and Mexico. And I really saw myself reflected in that painting. It was kind of a lot of the feelings that I was having at the time. Wasn't sure how I felt about this new place I was in. I was really kind of romanticizing my home, and really missing it. And I was like, who is this woman that can capture my own feelings even though I'm looking at her face in the painting? So I got a little obsessed with her, which I know that a lot of people get obsessed with Frida, especially when we're young women, like trying to find ourselves. And so I've really been carrying this story for a long time. And then when she kind of popped into my head, and I had a lot of experience editing films, I kind of ran to the books that I had read when I was young, and I realized that there's a lot of her words out there. That there's there's a lot of her writings out there, and I figured that she could tell some of her story. And that was the moment where I was like, I can't believe nobody has told her story through her own voice. And oh my God, like maybe it needs to be me. So I should just do it now. And that's when
I'm
I
so
decided.
glad you did because it's so brilliant. And I mean, I also was a young woman, very, very obsessed with Frida Kahlo. I thought I had read everything and knew everything about her, but all of this material I had no awareness of. I mean, so it was out in the world. It wasn't that you had to gain special access, or?
It's not. I mean, it's you can get access to it, but it's not readily available for anybody to just read all her writings. There's a lot of books. There's a lot of academics that have read all of her letters and her diary, but you only get fragments of her writings in those books, and all her testimonies of her life have not been published altogether. So there are letters that have been published in a book. Some letters that have never been published, but you can find in a museum in Oaxaca. There are letters that she sent to her mom that are in a museum in Washington, D.C. So there, they're available, but they're scattered everywhere. And then there's like different permissions that you have to get to be able to like get all the letters. So that was one of the when I started this project, my thought was there's an opportunity for Frida to tell some of her story. When we started actually researching the film at the beginning, it was kind of like handing Frida the mic and she would not let go. Because when we collected all the writings, we realized, wow, she could really tell all of her story. We really thought we were gonna be dependent on other people's voices a lot more. And it was just a beautiful thing. She was just like, no, 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 no. Yo lo voy a hacer, así que déjame el micrófono.
Yeah, I mean, who knew she was such a great writer?
Yeah, it was, and her letters especially. She was really writing to people that she loved very much, very much. So she was really open, and she was very comfortable, like swearing 100 times in her letters, or complaining about the things that she saw in different places she went to. So we really got like a very kind of vulnerable, even her fragility was very, very much open in on the pages of her letters. So we got like a very kind of like Frida sin pelos en la lengua, like, somebody that was just like really sharing her emotional state with people that she knew very well.
I feel like her paintings do that too, don't you? I mean, maybe that's why we're also drawn to her work, because you talked about the 1 foot in each border, but every one of her paintings has just such a profound resonance for a lot of us. So I feel like she's expressing these emotions that we can't express.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why, obviously she was discovered, her art was really discovered after she passed away. And I think it was because of how specific she was in sharing her personal journey, that I think that's why especially a lot of women connect with her art so much. That's what happened to me. I mean, it started with a painting, but it was, you're seeing her face. Is most of her paintings are self-portraits, but in the portraits she's carrying all her rawest emotions like on her skin, and they feel so present that it's really hard not to kind of connect with your own feelings when you're looking at her paintings. So she has that power of like being so incredibly personal that we just wanted to capture a little bit of that in this film.
Well, you did it beautifully. Can you talk a little bit about the team that you built to make the film?
So I wanted to really have a Latino film. In most of the creative the creative team is Latinx, first, second generation Latinx from different places. I mean, I'm from Peru, a lot of Mexican Americans, Guatemalan Americans, my producers, Ecuadorian, Irish, American. But it was also really very important for me to have Mexican talent be very involved in this film. I am not from Mexico. I have this kind of cultural relationship with Latin America, and I understood culturally kind of the world that created Frida in a way. But for me, it was really important to go so much farther than that with research and really understanding the time and really understanding the specific, history of Mexico. I think Mexico, I don't know if there's a lot of like Mexican Americans here, Mexicans. Yeah, we're in LA. But Mexico as a Latin American country went through something very special that most of us haven't really experienced, which was the Mexican Revolution, but also the cultural revolution that they went through. So really understanding that was really, really key in our work process. And then we wanted Mexican talent to be able to inject, Mexican blood into this film as much as we could. Our composer is Mexican from Michoacan. Our entire animation team was working out of Mexico City, most of them female, which was really great. And then we finished the film there, like all the audio, all the color. So hopefully that kind of like filtered through what you saw tonight.
It does. It really comes through. It's incredible. Why don't we take a few audience questions? Do we have some? Put your hand up if you would like to ask a question, and an usher will come to you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, hi. Yeah. There. I don't know. They just gave me one question, so I'm trying to. Okay, so I think for me, what really struck me, and I wasn't aware of until I watched this film, was that Frida didn't know what surrealism is, and how her work is very surrealist, but it's also very real. And what is most disappointing to me is that Diego Rivera was hanging out with Picasso, Dali in Paris. So, is there any more resources that kind of explore? It just seems like all these men were like gatekeeping from her. So, it's just like upsetting for me to like, I don't know, witness. Like, I don't know if you discover this. I don't know.
Obviously there's a lot of academic work that has been done in terms of like, is she a surrealist or not? It is something that I think is really, the way that I see it is a very complicated thing to establish, because she, we use what she said about surrealism, right? We also know that she was very much influenced by Catholic imagery. A lot of her paintings look like, yeah, this kind of like thinking like thanks for miracles, like imagery that is very raw. Indigenous imagery also is like mixed into her paintings. So, I think what we think in Latin America as magical realism, it sometimes it really gets mixed up or confused by, with surrealism a lot. So there's a lot of influences in her art, I believe. She was also in, an intellectual in Mexico. So I'm sure that she had a relationship to what was happening in Europe. And there is evidence that, she read like early surrealist work when she was in high school. So it's kind of like a complicated thing of like, where do you get your influences and like, where do you get, your inspiration from? And then there is also the emotional relationship that she had with the movement, how she felt, when she was being embraced by it at the beginning, and how, and her experience in Paris, and then she really rejected it. So I think it's a complicated relationship. The way that I see it, I think she's a mixture, like us Latin Americans, she's a mixture of a lot of influences and a lot of like how we understand dreams or our own reality as well. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Let's take another question from this side.
So many people want to just like scream out.
The usher will bring them a microphone.
Hi. I am fluent in Spanish. Yo hablo español fluyentemente. Soy ecuatoriana también.
Oh, cool.
Ecuatoriana y mexicana. I was just curious about the translations and the subtitle. And there were so many moments in the film, like knowing and understanding Spanish perfectly, and then finding, maybe being a little bit at odds with the subtitle or the translation. And not that it was wrong. It's like, I understand how translation work. You can't like translate things word for word. And oftentimes translating is about capturing the spirit and of something. And so it was interesting for me to read the subtitle and be like, yeah, I guess that would be one way of translating it, because, understanding that there are different ways. And so my question is like, what was the process for translating the subtitles, and how did you arrive to like, okay, this is the way we're going to translate it?
So I'm so glad that you brought that up, because it was actually the process of subtitles is something that is really important to me. I've worked as an editor. I worked on a lot of films that were in Spanish and were subtitled to English, and so it's interesting because actually my team went through like at very like passes at the subtitles with a lot of discussions as to what things meant. And how we were going to try to translate it in a way that it also felt like dialogue English, right? And sometimes there is like, there are phrases in Spanish that cannot be fully, like even the meaning of it cannot be fully translated in English. So we actually like there were some arguments within my teams as to like some of the things and what they meant and how we could translate them in English. So maybe there were a couple of translations where another team member had, how you would have translated it, but we went for something else. But it's something that, also thinking about like how much your eyes go into the subtitles so that you don't get distracted by what's happening visually. So we also like try to capture the essence of the meaning. But that's something that like is really important for me as a filmmaker to think about, because a lot of times the subtitles just are done by a company, and I've seen like very, very literal translations of films before. So I guess I felt like you sometimes with other films where I didn't feel like it didn't really capture the spirit, and that's something that we try to do in this film. Next time we'll call you. So you're part of the discussion.
Do we have another question on this side?
Yes, here. So I understand for the purpose of storytelling and for the constraints of time, you were not able to, or it's unrealistic to put all the materials that you find in the film. So I would be curious, like, what are the things you find that you would like to share here with us besides what you put in the film already?
So I always feel that there's nothing that I miss, because by letting go of some things, I felt that the story became better. What our intention was to capture the spirit of a person, and not necessarily to to make sure that you had a list of everything that happened in her life. Like I wanted her rebelliousness, her curiosity, her passion for her life from the very beginning, even like the questioning of authority, the questioning of like a system around her, to be very present. For example, in her childhood, I'm sure that many of you, if we have a lot of Frida lovers, we know that she had polio when she was little. But it was really important for me to like show how much of a rebel she was early on until her accident, right? So you make hard decisions when you're a filmmaker, but I feel that like all the decisions that you have to make is just so that you can really find the spirit of your character in a much more intense way. There's one thing that I really loved seeing and learning as we were working on this film that I wish I could do like a little short film about, which is the influence of her father in her work. We actually found all these self-portraits that he did as a photographer. And they're so cool. If you can look them up online, you can probably find some of them. But like he did so many self-portraits, and then she was doing so many self-portraits as an artist. She also really learned her self-portraits very much look like how she used to pose for her father and how she learned to pose for other photographers throughout her life. And even the fact that she, you hear in the film that she used to help her father in his studio, but she actually helped him retouch photographs. And the way that you retouch photographs, you have to be incredibly delicate and very disciplined, right? So there are descriptions of how she painted that we obviously didn't include in the film, where people describe that she painted from one corner. So she would do a sketch of what she wanted to paint, and then she started actually when she used paint, she would start from one corner and then move across the canvas. And then end at the other corner. and it was like with tiny little brush strokes. So I think that there's a short film about her father. There's like naked self-portraits of her father in photographs, in like this is like the 1920s and 1930s. They're awesome. Yeah.
Do we have a question on this side of the room?
First of all, over here, thank you
hi.
for the beautiful work. It's an amazingly assembled film from
Thank
start to
you.
finish. No talking heads to help along the way. So
Yeah,
keeping
no
it
talking
engaging like that. And so I'm just curious about your editing background and how you brought that into your directing debut, and what you learned about directing and when to take your hands off the wheel and let the editor do something versus wanting to do it yourself, like the editing that you've done in the past.
But you edited this film, right?
I did.
Okay, sorry.
I'm sorry. I thought it was a different name at the beginning as well for additional editing. Sorry.
We had a supervising editor who, if you look him up, he's has so many amazing credits. Which takes me to the biggest lesson I learned when I started directing this film, I think, and I learned that quickly, which I think was something that I was very lucky with, is that directing is really, making other people that are incredibly talented, like excited about your vision and bringing them on, but also really trusting them. Filmmaking is an art of collaboration. It can be the director's vision, but you also have to, learn how to give them a free space to experiment and bring in the talent, the talent that they have, to push you as a director. And I think that that's one of the things that was very clear for me from the beginning. And so the collaboration with my animation team, for example, there's a moment in the film where you see a lot of self-portraits of Frida, and she's just like looking out. She doesn't want to take any money from Diego anymore, but she also wants to make the paintings that she wants to make, even if she doesn't sell them. It's a moment of empowerment for her. And my animation team had the idea of, at the end, bring that little dog and bark at the viewer, right? And I was like, that's perfect. It like carries her determination. It's just like the little dog is being like, fuck you all. And then you see her like, being very, like a queen, like sitting next to the little dog. And so that's the magic that can happen in collaboration. And that was the biggest lesson that I got from, like, you really have to trust the people and get them excited about, working with your vision. And yeah, so many lessons about editing, but I'll leave it at that.
Do we have another question on this side of the room?
Here?
We're alternating sides. I'm sorry, we're recording this, and
We need the audio.
thanks.
Hello, thank you for the film. I don't have a question. I wanted to make a comment about the subtitling. I considered it to be conceptual subtitling, and I thought if it was very well done.
Oh, thank you.
Secondly, when I was still living in Mexico City in the 1990s, there was a play, staged play, about Mexicans' fascination with Americans' fascination with Frida. And all these 30-some years later, with all of the auctioning, movies, Madonna, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I thought that Frida había llegado ya a su punto final, and you brought a fresh air and a fresh
thank
vision. So I
you.
just want to thank you very much for this beautiful film.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'll say this, and we were talking backstage, and I was saying how nerve-wracking it was to take this film to Mexico, because I was just like, oh shit, like, I really, we did. We just really wanted to make sure that we were, that we gave justice to what is a Mexican story. I mean, this character, this person really loved her country. And so it was really, it was really special to take the film there. And thank goodness my head wasn't cut off. but I
loved it.
They did love it. So I think it was because we did really wanted to let Frida, really speak for herself, and just were guided by, by the intimacy of a complex woman. We wanted to just make her human from this kind of symbolic figure and very, commercialized figure that she's become.
Oh, let's take a question from this side of the room.
I also don't have a question, but from what she was saying, you did a great job. And Frida is chingona. She doesn't give a fuck about labels. She doesn't give a fuck about surrealism, editing, how, translation. And I think you did a great job of bringing her here politically and her voice. And I think that she would be very anti a lot of the commercialism, and you could feel her through your work. So I think you did an amazing job, and I think that her spirit would also feel the same. And we're Mexican artists, and we feel the same. So thank you.
Can I say
And
something
also,
controversial though?
Also, with your crew and who you're working with, that's political, and that means something, especially in the art world. So
Thank you.
yeah.
So I actually do think that she would have really loved all the merchandise about her. I think that she would have just had so much fun with it and tell people that's that stuff is ugly. Interesting stuff. I don't know. That's just kind of my take on it. I know that. There's some anime stuff that is really weird, but I don't know. I mean, I think she did believe that she was gonna be the biggest caca in the world after her death.
She was right. We have time for maybe one
Can
more.
we give the mic to this gentleman who is? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the film. It was a wonderful adventure into Frida and her life. But I wondered, after all the research that you've done with her letters, and they're all over the place, have you thought of compiling them and publishing them or making them available in, online or something? Because I think that was a wonderful thing that you did to make the film.
So my producer, Katia Maguire, would love that question. We're excited to hopefully, this film becomes a resource. And we do have this amazing database that we're happy to share with anybody. An author that is writing a book about another artist actually contacted us to find out where we got one of the sound bites, one of the phrases, because she hadn't read that in her research yet. What is really great that we were able to find is that we actually work with Hayden Herrera, who is, the writer of, I think, that the most well-known biography of Frida. And she had a chance to interview a lot of people that knew Frida in person. She had actually given her all her research, all her papers to the Smithsonian, and had thought that they had all her Frida papers. And when we contacted the Smithsonian to look at her research, they didn't have anything related to Frida. They had all her other research for other artists. So we, kept bothering Hayden to see if we can maybe go into her house and look for the research. And we actually ended up going to her house and cleaning out her attic, and we found this huge box of her original research. I had some transcripts of these interviews that a lot of academics use her work as kind of the basic for what we know of Frida now. And so we were able to review all of that, and we have handed it out to the Smithsonian as well. That's really important for us, that this, if we discover anything or we've done any work, to collect a database that's available for other work in the future.
That's amazing. I feel like we could ask you questions all night, but we have coffee, tea, and conchas out for the audience in front of the theater, and we're going to have a little informal reception there, and Carla Gutiérrez said she'd join us. So maybe you can ask her questions in person. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for making this film.